Sonaka said, "Child, son of Roma Harshana, your father studied all the Puranas and the Bharata under Krishna Dwapayana or Vyasa. Have you mastered them as well? Those ancient texts contain captivating narratives and the histories of the earliest generations of rishis, all of which we heard directly from your father. First, I wish to hear the history of the Bhrigu lineage. Recount that descent, and we will listen attentively." Sati replied, "I have fully absorbed everything that the venerable Brahmanas of antiquity, Vaisampayana among them, once studied and narrated. I have acquired all the knowledge my father possessed. Descendant of the Bhrigu lineage, listen now to everything pertaining to that exalted race, honored by Indra and all the demigods, by the assemblies of rishis and the maruts. Great sage, I will first relate the history of this clan as recorded in the Puranas. The blessed Maharishi Bhrigu, it is said, was manifested by Swayambhuva Brahma from the fire during Varuna's sacrifice. Bhrigu had a son named Chyavana, whom he cherished deeply. Chyavana had a virtuous son named Pramati. Pramati fathered a son named Ruru, with the Apsara, or celestial nymph, Gritachi. And to Ruru, through his wife Pramadvara, was born a son named Sonaka. He, O Sonaka, was your great and exceptionally virtuous ancestor. He was dedicated to sannyasa, widely renowned, proficient in dharma, and preeminent among those versed in the Vedas. He was fruitful and self-disciplined." Sonaka said, "Son of Sutta, why was Bhrigu's enlightened son named Chyavana? Tell me everything." Sati answered, "Bhrigu had a wife named Polama, whom he loved dearly. She became pregnant by him. One day, while the chaste Polama was in that state, Bhrigu, foremost among those faithful to their dharma, left her at home and went out to perform his ablutions. At that moment, a Raksha, a demon named Puluma, arrived at Bhrigu's ashram. Upon entering, the Raksha beheld Bhrigu's blameless wife and was overcome with desire, utterly losing his composure at the sight of her. The beautiful Poloma welcomed the demon with forest roots and fruits. The Rakshasa, inflamed with passion, was so delighted, noble Rishi, that he resolved to abduct Poloma, this woman of such purity and fidelity. "I will take what I desire," declared the Rakshasa, or demon, Raksha, and seizing the beautiful woman, he carried her off. It was indeed true that her father had once betrothed her, possessor of a lovely smile, to that very Rakshasa, or Raksha demon, though he later gave her in marriage to Bhrigu through Vedic rites. Sonaka of the Bhrigu lineage, this grievance festered deeply in the demon's mind, and he now seized the opportunity to abduct her. The demon noticed the Agnishala, where the sacred fire burned perpetually, and he addressed the fire god, the radiant elemental. "Tell me, O Agni, whose wife this woman is. You are the mouthpiece of the demigods. You must respond. Was this woman with petal-soft skin not first promised to me by her father? Did I not accept her? Yet her father then married her to the deceitful Bhrigu. Tell me truthfully whether this woman, this beautiful woman, is indeed Bhrigu's wife, for I have found her alone today and intend to take her from this ashram by force if she is the same woman. My heart burns at the thought that Bhrigu possesses this slender-waisted woman who was my betrothed. Sati continued. Repeatedly, the demon or Rakshasa pressed the blazing Agni to confirm whether the woman was Bhrigu's wife. The fire god hesitated to respond. "O Agni," said the Rakshasa, "you reside within every being as the witness of their sins and merits. Venerable Agni, answer me truthfully. Has Bhrigu not stolen the woman I selected as my wife? Tell me honestly, having been given to me first, is she not rightfully mine? Once I have your answer, I will carry her away from this ashram, even before your fiery eyes. Therefore, speak the truth." Sati continued. The seven-flamed fire god or demigod heard the Rakshasa and was distressed, fearing both to utter a falsehood and to incur Bhrigu's curse. Finally, the demigod or fire god replied, hesitantly and deliberately, "You indeed did first select Poloma, O Rakshasa, but you did not wed her with sacred rites and mantras. Her father bestowed this celebrated beauty upon Bhrigu because he sought Bhrigu's blessing. She was not formally given to you, Rakshasa. Rather, Rishi Bhrigu took her as his wife through Vedic ceremony, with me as witness. This is she. Yes, I recognize her. I dare not speak a lie. O foremost of the Rakshasas, falsehood finds no honor in this world." And that completes this section 5 of the Mahabharata, or at least part 5 of the Mahabharata in my podcast, Naked Hindu Tales. Now, because it is relatively short, I am going to provide you my analyses, my spiritual reflections of this Mahabharata section 5, or Canto 5. Please remember to leave a rating or review. I really appreciate it. You can leave it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Now, I want to remind you of what I taught you in the previous spiritual reflection episodes for the Mahabharata. Remember that here, Sonaka is not asking for facts. He's asking for the lineage, Bhrigu's lineage specifically, to be rebirthed through the element of sound. We are having Shakti moving through sound, and Shakti is the intelligence, the wisdom, the intelligent wisdom, right? Wisdom. She is the wisdom that is hiding somewhere in this scene of the Mahabharata section 5. And so remember, this is exactly what is happening here. And Sati is bringing this lineage into existence through sound, through storytelling, to sacred listeners. Now, this scene here is kind of a courtroom sort of a scene that is occurring, at least in the flashback that Sati offers about Poloma, this beautiful woman who is abducted, and there's a sort of a judgment here, a courtroom scene, right? Who has the right to call this woman his wife? Is it Bhrigu or is it this demon or Rakshasa, a malevolent being? Who has the right to Poloma, this beautiful woman? And Agni is the judge in some ways. Agni, this demigod or fire god, is being placed in the role of the judge, the judgment deliverer. And so he has to express wisdom. This is similar to how in the Hebrew Bible, the Christian Bible, the King Solomon is placed as the judge, right? The deliverer of wisdom. The key questions, key answers, all have to come from him, and they must be founded in wisdom. And here we have this fire god, Agni, this demigod, being placed in that exact same role. So what we have here is Bhrigu, who's a sage. Poloma is the woman at the center of the key question here that requires wisdom to be expressed, that requires Shakti to be expressed, right? And the Rakshasa or the demon is the desire and grievance. Rakshasas or Rakshas, as I call them, demons, as I call them, they are typically known as malevolent beings in Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism. Okay? Sometimes they're good in some stories and some like Hindu myths, but usually they are depicted in a bad light. Agni, the fire god or the demigod here, is the witness. He's the law. He's conscious. He is the vehicle through which Shakti will move. And in some ways, Agni is being tested himself here, where we have a test of the question of Poloma's marriage. We also have a question here of Agni, his ability to be wise, his ability to transmit Shakti. And because of what Agni does in this episode, in this scene from the Mahabharata, this small section 5, as I call it, in Naked Hindu Tales podcast, because of what he does, it's no surprise actually that we have fire being seen as often an element through which Durga Devi, the female face of God, comes through or can be invocated, right? Can be invited into our lives. Durga Devi, Devi, the female face of God, the goddess in Hinduism, is often associated with light, divine light, and of course from fire we not only transmit heat, but we also transmit light. Right? So it's not a surprise here that Agni does end up passing the test of whether or not he can express wisdom, whether or not Shakti can move through him, can flow through him to the ears of the Rakshasa or Rakshas. And of course, in this Mahabharata section 5, as I call it in this Naked Hindu Tales podcast, these two individuals, Sonaka, the chief priest or the highest mind state, and Soti, the divine storyteller, they are playing the roles of custodians of memory. They are custodians of memory of this lineage and these stories. Now, these individuals, you may not know, but just to provide you some background of some of the names that are given in Brigu's lineage, it's important for you to know this background. Chavana means like fallen, right? In Sanskrit, I believe from Chut, it means to fall. His name, Chavana, encodes kind of an original sin in the lineage of Brigu. He's a sage who ages prematurely, marries a princess, and rejuvenates via kind of this like celestial demigod medicine from the Ashwins, okay? Ruru is mentioned also in the story as being part of Brigu's lineage. Ruru, even the name is fierce. It sounds fierce. It actually means the roaring one. He's actually born from a seduction, right? Born from the seduction of a celestial nymph. Okay, so there is a kind of an erotic rage underlying Ruru's being. He actually vows to kill all snakes after Pramadvara's death. Okay, his wife's death. Remember, Pramadvara is Ruru's wife, as mentioned earlier on in this episode. Sunaka is actually Sonaka Kulapati, the chief priest's ancestor. And this ancestor attempts to sublimate the lineage's violence into asceticism. Okay, attempts to transform it through severe self-discipline. So it's kind of like, in modern terms, you would see this as like a karmic blockchain that we are being provided with here in this scene of the Mahabharata. We are kind of being told to save into memory, acknowledge and save into memory Brigu's lineage and all these individuals that have key parts to play in that lineage, key roles to play, that have had key roles to play in that lineage. Notice also the Rakshasa's adamancy. He's very adamant in this story when he appears before the fire god. He wants to abduct, he wants to have this beautiful woman, Poloma, as his own. And he almost is trying to play the part of being the transmitter of the true Shakti, right? Being the transmitter of Shakti, the divine intelligence, intelligent wisdom, wisdom itself, right? Wisdom is always intelligent, so I should say wisdom. He's trying to be that transmitter by kind of wanting to answer Agni's dilemma for him, right? He's adamant. He just basically says, I know Poloma was promised to be wed to me. She is mine. I know she is mine, therefore. But he's also seeking validation, because inherent to that is, to the demon or demonic energies, is self-mistrust. Cannot trust oneself with the truth, or cannot trust oneself to be the transmitter of the true truth, the actual truth, the absolute truth. That is why he keeps pressing Agni for the answers, even though he at the same time seems to convey to this demigod, the fire demigod, that he knows what the answer is already, that this beautiful woman, Poloma, who he has abducted, is his, was meant to always be his. But the truth is, those aspects of us that are, let's say, of chaos or are currently suffering, as I explain in my book, What is God Good For? Evil, Karma, Sin, and Suffering, correctly explained finally, cannot be trusted to convey the truth to us. It's kind of like when as I write in that same book, which you should definitely grab on Amazon and read. In that book, I teach you that even this whole mindfulness movement, without the worship of God, can be a false movement. It can be one that brings harm rather than causing one to come close to absolute truth as much as is possible on earth. Because how can one trust one's own mind if one's own mind is not yet purified or is still suffering, right? So we need God. Our minds need God. That's why Agni, the demigod here, fire being the holder or actual vessel for the transmission of heat and divine light, right? Light energy is more reliable. That's why Agni is reliable and is chosen as the vessel. And it's almost like this Raksha, this demon, knows deep down inside that what he is saying to himself cannot be trusted about Poloma. He needs to know the truth, the actual truth, and that can only come through Agni. Can only come through this. It is the most effective vehicle for Shakti to come through, meaning for wisdom to come through and intelligence to come through, supreme intelligence to come through, as I refer to God in my book, Who God Really Is. And that's why we have this very tight, intense back and forth between Agni and the demon, this Rakshasa. It's a small scene, but it is so revealing, right? It reveals to us these multiple sides of us, multidimensional sides of us. There's always aspects of us that we cannot trust if we have not overcome our suffering yet. Those are the chaotic elements of us. That's the demon in us, so to speak, the Rakshasa expression in us. And it is of mystery, and it cannot trust oneself. And we often express that in major or minor ways as we move through normal day-to-day routines and our lives. The most spiritually attentive individuals will realize when that side of them is being expressed in major or minor circumstances in their lives. And then, of course, there's that more good side of us, the side of us where we can definitely express or receive and transmit even to others wisdom, intelligence, supreme intelligence. So both of these sides are always functioning. And in this small scene, there's a very intense back and forth that goes on between this demon, Rakshasa, and the demigod, the fire god, Agni, over Poloma. this back and forth, because these two sides of us are always functioning as we move through life. And this is why I always say repeatedly throughout this podcast that Hinduism is the most realistic religion in existence. It is so true. And just this small scene in section 5 of the Mahabharata, we can see that truth come forward or be expressed. Now, what is fascinating is that in this small scene, we do not have Poloma's voice come through. Her, the text is right now silent on her voice, but it's fascinating, right? She offers fruits, but she never speaks. She offers fruit and hospitality to the demon, but she never speaks in the text. She's very welcoming. She might even be naive. Here, I am reminded of Eve. Eve being almost, or actually being deceived by the serpent, the snake, or Satan from the Hebrew Bible, the Christian Bible, right? Christian scriptures. Why does this happen? Why does the text have this happening at least right now, where Poloma does not have any say in what is happening with her body, with her being here in this scene? Why does this happen? It's because the text is meant to be realistic, and this is a reflection of the times. This is a reflection of just how life was thousands of years ago, when women were simply subjugated or seen as property. It is a cultural expression. This is the way I understand this. And it's meant to be this way because the text wants it to be this way, because the text is also meant to be real. It wants to be realistic. It wants to be realistic. It's rare that women were able to speak up about their own belonging, where they belong or who they belong to. Women many times were married as just, as dowry or traded, right? Back then in ancient civilizations. The Mahabharata wants to be realistic. It is realistic. It is true to the reality of the culture of that time, thousands of years ago. And it has to be that way to be believable, right? To be sort of believable, to be cultural, to reflect culture as it was thousands of years ago. What is fascinating is that Agni fears two curses, right? Brigu's curse, which is for betraying hospitality, and Dharma's for lying. He chooses truth. And why does this happen is because, again, that relation, that fire being an element that transmits not only heat but also light, has to Shakti, the female face of God. Shakti also being known as, we can say Parvati or Durga Devi, goddess in Hinduism. And as I explain in my book, Who God Really Is, ultimately Shakti really always has been divine light or truth, supreme intelligence, wisdom. Okay? That's why this is happening as it is in this scene in the Mahabharata with Agni. And Agni's dilemma here is not so foreign to us in our postmodern world. It's really not that foreign to us humans in our postmodern world at all. Imagine the world before paper and records. The record is embodied. The fire that consumed offerings, the presence that watched rites, the river that heard vows and secrets. Agni is an externalized conscience, right? Agni is that record. Agni is the externalized conscience. He is like a social technology we trust to hold memory. But again, notice the paradox. Agni fears to say what is true initially because truth risks the wrath of a powerful rishi, Brigu. This tension is modern. Think of whistleblowers and institutions. We design systems, audits, cameras, notaries to be neutral witnesses, to be the ultimate judges, right? In a lot of ways, the judges that we have in our court systems, right? The judge that appears before you in a court is really not the first judge or the ultimate judge. A lot of ways, it's the evidence that brings upon the judgment. It's the evidence that is captured by what? Cameras, right? Cameras. And through cameras, we have lens and light functioning. And I describe all of that, the important spiritual symbolic meanings of light, the visible light spectrum and cameras and lenses and the eye in my book, Who God Really Is. And I encourage you all to read my books, grab my books on Amazon. Now, in our postmodern world, like the people who run these systems, they can manipulate whistleblowers, they can threaten them. These, witnesses, right? These systems that are neutral witnesses, they can be manipulated. People who control or stand beside these systems can coerce or silence. They can create fear. They can hamper justice. Agni's hesitation is kind of like the cleavage between the ideal of an impartial witness and the reality that the witness is embedded in power. That hesitation is the overlap. It lies somewhere in that gray space between the ideal of an impartial witness and the reality that the witness is embedded in power dynamics and control. Now, spiritually, of course, Agni does represent the witness consciousness that exists inside each being. When we ask our inner witness for the truth, through as we are self-healing, as we are evaluating our relationships in our lives, how we react and respond to people in our lives, how maybe anything good or bad that we have done, that inner witness also calculates the consequences. Do we tell ourselves truth or do we not? And that's exactly when that Raksha in us fights the kind of good side in us, the pure Agni or fire in us, which is the absolute transmitter of Shakti, pure Shakti. So we always have that Raksha interplaying with the good side of us, as I explained earlier on in this Naked Hindu Tales episode. Now we have this very interesting conundrum that appears between what is promised or said and what is actually enacted or processed and completed or done, right? The Raksha is furious. The demon is furious because this beautiful, slender, gorgeous woman, Poloma, was quote unquote first promised to him. There are two logics occurring in the story. Affective, right? Someone's desire and claimed expectation. That is what is the affective logic. It is someone's desire and claimed expectation. And then there is the ritual-legal logic. This is the ritual-legal is the formal, basically establishment or investiture of marriage. The text emphasizes the formal one. The father initially did give Poloma to the Rakshasa or the demon, but informally. The father, however, father of Poloma, right? He later sought Brigu's blessing and actually went further than just, promising. He performed Vedic rites with the demigod, the fire god Agni, as the witness to these rites. The story gives privilege to ritual legitimization over pre-contractual desire. So in some ways, Agni, the fire god, is trying to maintain a marriage and not have it, let's say in the modern terms, end up in divorce. There is an attempt here to prevent extramarital affair or divorce here. This is sort of a legal judgment that is coming through this ancient Indian civilization text, the Mahabharata. Verbal promises versus contracts. Now our human sides, or I should say part of our human sides, can understand the grievance of this demon. We can see our human self in the demon, because when we are given a claim to something and we are promised something, we are promised we will be able to claim something, and then it doesn't happen, we are prevented from it, we feel cheated. But the world enforces the written, the witnessed, what is caught on camera, or what is documented, what is ceremonially sealed. That's what the world recognizes. And this is what must be understood. So when we think about ancient cultures or the ancient human intelligence, the human intelligence of thousands of years ago, that culture and the ancient human mind needed to hear this small story from the Mahabharata, what I call section 5 of the Mahabharata, because you just, at that time, you cannot just act on every desire or any desire that you have. There are limits, there are boundaries. There is a structure and a form to society and to civil being, to civil society. And it is one that is worked through Vedic rites and Vedic rituals. It is ceremonially sealed. So you just cannot take another person's woman, so to speak, right? You cannot ruin someone else's marriage out of your desires, or ruin your own even out of desires. This is what this scene of the Mahabharata is trying to instill in the minds of ancient humans, okay, who are reading the Mahabharata as we are today, or who are listening to the Mahabharata as we are today, as you are today through the Naked Hindu Tales podcast. And it was important for the ancient human intelligence to receive this lesson through the Mahabharata, through this text. Just imagine, like those humans were not as advanced, they did not have the capacity for understanding that we have today. And it really does remind me of why everyone needs to, in the modern world, in the postmodern world, read my book, Who God Really Is, because we are now more capable than we were thousands of years ago, than our ancestors were thousands of years ago. Our ancient ancestors were, to understand God exactly as He has wanted to be known. And that's the knowledge that I provide in my book, Who God Really Is. So I encourage you all to read my book today. Grab it on Amazon. Now, this section of the Mahabharata leaves us with an interesting question. Whose pain is to be acknowledged? How do we acknowledge the demon's grief? It does exist, his grief exists. But also think about the grief that Brigu will feel. The harm that he will feel was done to him if Poloma is ultimately abducted and not given back to him, and even if the demigod, the fire god, were to side with the demon and his grief. Like, whose pain is to be acknowledged? The ritualized order, at least for now, refuses to remedy this grief of the demon. And this is what I find so fascinating about Hindu mythology. Hindu mythology gives sort of human personas to these demons. And in some ways we can relate with them. And there is some understanding that we can have that maybe makes us side with a little bit with some of these demons that are that are placed in these fascinating dilemmas, right? I mean, we can understand that the Rakshasa possibly should have had, Poloma as his wife if he was promised a Poloma. But for some reason, the Vedic rites were conducted between Brigu and Poloma, not between the demon, right, and this beautiful woman, Poloma, by the father. That's the piece that's missing here, right? The why. Why? What happened there? Nevertheless, though, beauty is kind of betrothed to the powerful rishi, the sage. Good always comes to the more faithful. That is what the text is trying to get through to us. Remember, stories that preserve blemishes are more honest, and that's exactly what the stories of Hinduism, of Hindu mythology do. That is important to remember. Even sages, like Brigu being a very powerful sage, you might think, he should be super kind, he should be lovely all the time, he might even be the kind of individual who would turn the other cheek, but instead, even the demigod fears the wrath of this rishi. And that's not so surprising because we have anger that is often used by Durga Devi and other, and even the male Hindu gods to establish order and harmony once chaos persists or once the wrong intelligence is deployed in circumstances, right? The chaos that comes from that needs to be restored, and often it is restored through some form of rage, some form of anger. And Brigu, as a powerful rishi, also can express those energies in order to get back what is rightfully his, if it were to be the case that Agni ruled in Rakshasa's favor, so to speak. Also understand that we are being taught again through this Mahabharata episode that rituals can be both liberating and constraining. Now remember King Janamajaya's fire rituals from the previous podcast episodes of the Mahabharata? Remember, his brothers were conducting a ritual, and from that ritual, well, they were conducting it to be liberated, right? But there was also a constraint that ended up resulting from that ritual. The puppy was hit, the puppy was wanked or whatever, and there's a karmic debt or IOU that came through from that fire ritual that King Janamajaya's brothers conducted. So rituals, again, they can be both liberating and constraining. They grant protection, they grant legal protection, but they also frame lives in strict terms. The rituals that we see thus far being depicted in the Mahabharata, they are truly sort of these vehicles, right? These fire rituals are vehicles through which boundaries and guidelines and the kind of the forward progress of these different characters in the Mahabharata are flowing through. So these kind of guidelines are being developed, and the characters are following these guidelines. These fire rituals are the rituals from which these guidelines sort of progress or protrude, and the characters are being forced to live by these guidelines or along these guidelines. Reminds me a lot of what I write about the universe's fundamental framework in my book, Who God Really Is. Fire rituals of King Janamajaya's brothers, there's like curses that come from that, and then King Janamajaya is forced to move forward. The story of his life moves forward on a quest to get rid of these curses, which leads to other things happening later on, as explained in the previous episodes. From these fire rituals comes the progress of these characters' lives, the movement of their lives, and it's along these guidelines or the dividing lines between right and wrong, what is moral and immoral, okay? A mature spiritual approach sees rituals as tools that will allow the progress of one's life to manifest, to become a reality. There will be fruits that come from your rituals, your worship rituals. Those fruits will determine kind of the guidelines of your life, or the guidelines against which your life flows or moves forward. And when these worship rituals are really for God in truth, when they are, about God and about worshiping God in truth, the God who I describe in my book, Who God Really Is, you are guaranteed that the fruits will be ones that safeguard your dignity, okay? Now, imagine a small fire in your heart and also one in your mind. That's your Agni, okay? That's the demigod, the fire god, Agni, in you. Ask yourself now, when I feel wronged, who is my witness? Breathe in, breathe out. Let images come to you. Do not judge them. You might imagine other people. You might even imagine your pet or your dog or your cat who stares at you as you do some things that might be questionable, or as you live out some form of suffering, like crying in silence, in solitude, crying when no one's watching or getting angry when no one's watching except for your dog or your cat, right? So when you feel wronged, or ask yourself, when I feel wronged, who is my witness? Allow images of different people or even yourself or an image of God or any of your pets to come to your mind. But imagine giving a voice now to that part of you that was promised something and then left in silence. Speak to that small fire in your heart and in your mind. And say to yourself now, I claim my truth. I am open to truth. Let the inner witness answer with compassion, not fear. Let my inner witness give me my truth. As you are doing this visual meditation, do identify your inner demon or inner Rakshasa, the part that feels entitled, wounded, and prepared to seize. Don't flatter it, but identify it. And ask your inner witness, that small fire in your heart and in your mind, if the complaint that you have, the complaint of your inner demon, is legitimate. If it is, honor that energy with ritual or conversation. Honor it with, putting some actions into practice to gain what is right or to restore order and harmony to what is lacking or spare or scarce or chaos. However, remember, worshipping using Hindu mantras will get your inner witness to be the most truthful to you. So that is something that you should do even before you engage in this visual meditation. You should chant Hindu mantras, very basic main ones like Om Namah Shivaya or Om Dum Durgaye Namaha, right? Especially those two. Om Gan Ganapatiye Namaha. Om Gan Ganapatiye Namaha. Those 2 or 3 before you engage in this visual meditation. You should get into the practice of chanting the Hindu mantras first to ensure that divine light, the light of Shakti, intelligent wisdom or simply wisdom, is what is awakened in your inner witness. Now remember, in closing, that every family, institution, organization, and tradition decides which stories it wants to pass on. Choosing to tell the hard ones, like those filled with some humiliation, betrayal, ambiguous morality, helps communities cultivate wisdom. So it's important to not leave out the bad parts of the stories of our lives. It's a practice, right? Teach not only triumphs, but small failures. Because life is going to be filled with triumphs and small failures, guaranteed, even if you increase your likeness to God, to near fullness of Him, as I explain in my book, Who God Really Is. Do grab your copy on Amazon today. Thanks for listening to this episode of Naked Hindu Tales. You can ask me any spiritual or non-spiritual question you have in your reviews on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and I'll be happy to answer your questions in a future episode for the benefit of all. Thanks for listening, and I'll speak with you in the next episode.